Underdog Fantasy is the fastest growing fantasy app and easiest place to play fantasy sports. Just jump on UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app, draft your team, and that's it. And if drafts aren't your thing, they also have a pick'em game where you can win 20 times your money in a single night. Use promo code RADIO, and Underdog will double your first deposit when you sign up with up to $100 in bonus cash. Deposit $100, get $100 free. That's promo code RADIO. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to the return of Meet the Press Slam here on a Wednesday night during Dynamite. But I am fantastically talking to a new friend of mine. He is a 5-star match game winner. Recently 5-star match game winner of the 2000 independent scene, which we will be delving into. And you can find his work at kevin-ford.com, formerly of PW Ponderings. He is Kevin Ford. How are you doing, Kevin?
Hey, man, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be back kicking off this show for you.
I really thought of you when you were doing the 5-star match game. I was like listening to that, and I was cracking up at all the references. Because just to give some reference point, I'm from Philadelphia, and like even though I was only like 13, 14 years old when a lot of the late 2009 independent scene was happening, a lot of that stuff sort of trickled into my knowledge early on as a fan. So it really influenced me as a fan. Some of my first wrestling shows were Shikara shows. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of my bread and butter is that era. I didn't get into the independents till later 2000s, but I went back and I watched a lot of that stuff and took it all in. It really like consumed my wrestling fandom at that time.
Yeah. So when did you become a fan?
Of just wrestling in general?
Just wrestling in general, and then we'll talk more about like the independents and stuff like that. So starting when you became a fan at first.
So I was a really young kid when I got into wrestling. Nobody in my family was into wrestling. But my brother was very much into video games. And when I was a kid, when we go out, my mom, like we'd go out to like the mall or something on weekends, my mom would go off and do her thing, and my dad would take my brother and I places. And my first introduction to wrestling was the WrestleFest arcade game.
Wow.
When I was young, my dad would tell me like I would just be looking at the screen so transfixed on, the Ultimate Warrior, Demolition, Legion of Doom, all these characters. Like, what is this? And then later, I remember my mom bought me the Roddy Piper Hasbro action figure, and I discovered somehow at my grandparents' place on like a preview for Royal Rumble 1994, where they were running through all the participants, and it was that same thing of like seeing these images of like Crush, the Head Shrinkers, and like who are these characters? And they had that video where like the Undertaker is building Yokozuna's casket.
Oh so yeah, that video is so legendary of the Undertaker building. That promo is so great.
Yeah, and I'm just like, what is this? It's so crazy. So I was just watching it over and over again. And then just a couple weeks later, my dad or whoever for me found Raw, and the rest is history. Been watching ever since.
Yeah, for me, I came into it. I'm a little younger than you. I'm 26. Mm-hmm. So I came into it around 2005. So the first heel I hated was JBL. And rightfully so, given all the controversy he has, but
sure.
But he was the first heel I hated. First guy I really loved was Eddie Guerrero, and it sort of was the first sign of like fandom, like becoming like a fan. Was I always gravitated to like the athletic guys because I always came from a sports background, and I love sports. I could rattle off all the sports page. It was at the end of that era, so I would read the sports pages and stuff like that. I watch Sports Center.
I love 2005 WWE. I think like New Generation, because that's when I started, is like always gonna have a soft spot in my heart. Like 92, 93 to like 97 is my favorite, but I adore that era of WWE as well. It's one of my friends' favorite eras. So like I feel like I can completely understand your age coming into it and seeing that and getting a fan, because I think it's so great. It's still that era where like everybody had a really defined character. There's a really good mix of wrestling with story. It doesn't get the love it deserves, I think.
I agree, honestly. It feels like it gets a little bit of the shaft in terms of the eras that it is in, because it was post Monday Night War, and not as many eyes were on it, and it's hard for me to understand that, because this is the era I got into it. A lot of people fell out of wrestling at that time, of course, but for me, this was the time where I was becoming very much involved with the fandom, like 05 to 07, especially.
Yeah, like that early 07 and like late 06 period was like my freshman year of college, when I found friends in college. We'd watch the pay-per-views and watch like Raws each week and stuff. And so like that to me is a very sweet spot too. But I genuinely think there's a lot of really great stuff in that time. Like if you go back to like that early 07 period and you watch like from like the TV after New Year's Revolution through like Judgment Day or like Backlash, is like such a great current time period WWE stuff.
Yeah, I really like that New Year's Revolution with when Edge won the Money in the Bank, cashed in the Money in the Bank, Cena, and Cena was just pouring blood. One of my favorite matches from that era actually was Cena JBL I Quit match.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That, you talk about
violence.
Yeah.
Talk about bleeding buckets. Both of them blood buckets that night. And it was stark to me, like how much that era has an influence on my fandom,
I think that's everybody. It's like kind of what you grew up with and stuff kind of colors your fandom forever in some ways.
Yeah. So how did you find independent wrestling, which would obviously create everything you've done since?
Yeah, I think the first time I really knew about it was I was so into wrestling figures when I was a kid, and I would go to like the wrestlingfigs.com message board and look at customs and stuff, and I would see people making customs of these wrestlers I never heard of. Samoa Joe, Reckless Youth, Low Key, like a Steve Corino, and I was like, I haven't seen him in years. What's he up to? And then the first moment I remember of significance someone posting about was Austin Aries winning the Ring of Honor World title. Because at that time, Samoa Joe had been champ for like 20 months, 21 months, whatever it was. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And just kind of reading about it. And then at that time, Ring of Honor had put out a few of their first shows to like buy at retail, like your Suncoast Videos, Sam Goody's, Coconuts. And so I went and I found the first Ring of Honor show and bought it. And I was like, and that main event, especially, I was like, this is wrestling like I've never seen before.
Right.
And I was a high schooler, I didn't have a job or anything. So it'd be a couple years later when I was in college, and somebody on the F4W message board was just giving away like a stack of Ring of Honor DVDs. And I was like, I'll take them. And it was like Death Before Dishonor, Final Battle 03, a couple other shows. And I was like, whoa. And then that's when I really started looking into more of the current ROH at that time, like the Milestone series had come out with like the first, like their first ECW arena show, their first WrestleMania weekend. That was a big deal, that kind of stuff. And then that really hooked me in to independent wrestling. And then it was just, when you go into the message boards and stuff about that, that's when you learn about PWG, Chikara, CZW, those companies. And so like ROH was sort of the gateway drug into finding out about everything else.
Yeah, I think ROH was my gateway drug, honest. I think CZW was my gateway drug, to be completely honest, because I think every independent fan has that deathmatch phase where they're amazed by the deathmatch. like, whoa, this is actually happening in a wrestling ring. I had it very early on. So my mom had a boyfriend at the age of like 14. Like my parents got separated and stuff like that. So we don't need to go into that. But she had a boyfriend who introduced torrents into our house.
Oh boy.
So I crashed a couple computers downloading wrestling torrents, but I found Extreme Wrestling XWT at the time. And let's say I absorbed a lot of wrestling through torrenting at the time because I was just a 14-year-old kid. I was just a 14, 15-year-old kid. I didn't know that you could buy this stuff. And I didn't discuss it with anyone on the boards or anything like that. I just called into like this wrestling show called Wrestling Soup, and Don Tony and Kevin Castle, and I've heard of the Declaration of Independence, late stage too. So that was really my introduction to indie wrestling. So starting watching like CZW and Chikara and Ring of Honor early on was definitely an influence. And then the thing that influenced my Japanese watching was Misawa's death. And everybody saying Misawa was the greatest of all time. And I'm like, who the hell is Misawa?
Misawa's death actually happened on my 21st birthday. So I remember that day very well. Coincidentally, there was a Ring of Honor show the day before Manassas, Virginia, which is like 10 minutes from my house. So I was there with some friends, midnight hit, celebrated. And I think it was like waking up the next morning and learning that Misawa was dead. And you're like, whoa, holy crap.
Wow.
And like they mentioned on that Ring of Honor show in New York City that night. And like I remember like hearing Chris Hero talk about it because he was in Noah, like he was in the building that night, and hearing him talk about it, and like it sticks in my memory so clearly that how vividly that was. And I'd really only known about Japanese wrestling through the guys I had seen in ROH at that time, Kenta, right, Marufuji, Morishima, Go Shiozaki. But that did get me to check out, like, I remember in 09, especially, like there was 2 matches Kenta and Katsuhiko Nakajima had that were incredible.
Yeah.
And I, of course, seen the Kobashi and like Misawa ROH matches too. But yeah, that's interesting that like that does happen though. You hear the story or something like that and you're like, what is this? And then you look into it and that leads to one thing or another. Like someone a few years ago had an article about how like a lot of wrestling today, like some of the moves that we know of were innovated by like the All Japan women of the 90s.
Right.
And that's how I learned about Megumi Kudo and became a huge fan of hers and watched some of her stuff. And it almost was like that deathmatch thing, because there were a couple of them were like those exploding death matches and stuff, but you're like something just about it being, you know, a smaller Japanese woman and a larger Japanese woman in that environment. You're like, whoa, this is insane. Can't keep your eyes off of it.
Oh yeah, those FMW exploding death matches, those things you couldn't keep your eyes off it. Like early YouTube was the Wild Wild West.
Yeah,
people don't even know, dude.
And I just have that image of like her retirement match against Shark. Oh, I forget how to pronounce her last name. But like her students or whoever, like covering her backstage filled with like water and stuff because she was burning, and like her speech and seeing Onita come in is like that is stuff is such like burned into my brain because of like the music and the way it was shot. It's nuts to think about.
Yeah, and like there's some images that will stick with you forever in wrestling.
Yeah,
it's weird
like
because. It's weird because some images are obvious and then some are not so obvious.
Yeah, there's like the shared ones, like, you know, the Austin bleeding and stuff, but then we all have your own individual ones from depending on what you're doing at that time or who you were with, just those different moments impacting you.
Like one of the moments that will stick with me forever is watching Kenny Omega win the G1 in the Poconos. I was like, I've been waiting to watch this match versus Naito, and I'm like, man, if Kenny doesn't win or Naito doesn't win, I don't know who's gonna win. But I watched that match on a computer in the Poconos. I had the New Japan World subscription at the time, and boy, I wasn't disappointed.
Did you stay up and watch it, or did you like get up first thing the next day and watch it?
Got up first thing next day. I didn't. I avoided spoilers.
Yeah, that's what you have to do with a lot of those like New Japan shows. Like if you really want to avoid spoilers, like Wrestle Kingdom morning, it's like, all right, I'm going to wake up and watch Wrestle Kingdom, and then when it's done, then I can go on Twitter or whatever else.
Yep, exactly.
Same with G1 or whatever else. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and those G1, like the big turning point for me. 2011 was a turning point for me as a wrestling fan because of the whole Summer of Punk thing.
Sure.
But also 2013, 2014 New Japan Pro Wrestling. Big.
And that was still the Ustream time in 2013, wasn't it?
Yeah, 2013. Yeah, I was following it through Jamal's channel on Dailymotion.
Oh, okay.
Because Jamal was posting was like after the fact, posting on the matches on his Dailymotion, and I just was floored. The first time I saw Shibata and Ishii, you can't beat that stuff.
Yeah, like I remember watching Shibata and Sakuraba from Wrestle Kingdom 9 and just being like, holy shit, this type of wrestling exists.
Yeah,
it's nuts.
Yeah.
But man, like you talk about, so like you talked about going through computers. I was terrified of doing torrents in college and stuff for that reason. So I was legitimately buying like all the Ring of Honor DVDs and stuff. And that eventually, like, you have to make your choices of, okay, what am I going to watch or whatever else. But like those people who would upload stuff like today to like Dailymotion or like Billy or whatever these other websites are, like, man, you think about how there's a handful of people, even going back to like tape trading days, or the people who uploaded stuff to either torrents or these other websites and things. And it's like, yes, you're costing the company money, but how many of those people through word of mouth or other things really helped a lot of these promotions grow? So it's so interesting to think, like, if that person or whoever decided not to upload this or put it or record it off their television and pass it around, it's like, what events or what wrestlers or matches or whatever wouldn't be the stuff of legend they've grown into.
Right. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I don't torrent anymore because I have the means to wrestle. I have the means to financially supplement my wrestling habit.
For sure. Well, and thank God for stuff like IWTV and the High Spots Network and all these other things. Like, those are such a boon to getting more eyes on independent wrestling and stuff. Like, there is part of me that's so glad that stuff wasn't around when I was in college, because I would have been in big trouble. But
I would be in big trouble too.
Yeah. But for finances and just having all that stuff archived, like, it's a beautiful thing to have those services now. We take, like, there's people out there who are just getting into indie wrestling who don't know any different, but for us who do, it's hard not to we won't take it for granted, I should say.
Right. I was at the last stage of that, like mega upload. Like how did computers survive? Like I don't know how I didn't destroy more computers. but going to shows is another thing that was an early on influence. In high school, I went to a couple horror shows. Didn't really have a community to go with, so my dad took me. And my dad is not a wrestling fan.
Mm-hmm.
And so my first first wrestling show, Chikara show I went to. But my first overall wrestling show I went to was a SmackDown in 2008 that I'm going to actually be talking about between the sheets.
Nice.
In a few months after the Great American Bash. But
wow.
But I went to King of Trios Night 3 2010.
Okay, yeah, I was there for that.
The BDK one.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I was there all 3 nights. That's interesting. So what did your dad think? Because I feel like Chikara is actually a really good company for non-wrestling fans, but I also think there's a certain personality that would go into it and either be like, what the heck is this? Or they would be more embracing of it.
He's more like, what the heck is this?
Okay.
And it was more silly and more, especially Chikara at that time.
Yeah.
But the heat was there. It was a good final too, because it was Brutus Shaft and Colony.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And Colony are the ultimate baby faces in that company.
Yeah. Well, and BDK was just running roughshod at that time. Yeah, that was I'm trying to think. It was like Kingston versus Christopher Daniels.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a pretty good year. I was legit mad that BDK won because I was just like tired of seeing them winning. But it's one of those things. Once you get some distance behind it, or you see the whole story play out, you can see better than what they.
I would talk on the whole story playing out. Oh boy.
Yeah.
With the shutdown.
Your golden. Oh, the shutdown. Yeah, for sure.
But I remember going to High Noon. That was my second and last Chikara event I went to. I've been to the 2 of the more prolific Chikara events of Chikara's history.
Yeah, High Noon was huge.
That was their first pay-per-view.
Yeah, I was there.
I didn't even know. Like, I had a CM Punk T-shirt on. I went because the card looked good, and the Young Bucks were on there, versus I think it was Colony.
That was the Colony, yeah. Well, that was the really great thing about Chikara with that pay-per-view is, Chikara were the first people to bring the Young Bucks to the East Coast, because at the time the Bucks were just doing PWG, and they brought him in for King of Trios 09 with Generico as their partner, and they had wisely sort of made at that time the Bucks, Generico, and Cabana were like extended family members of Chikara. Like, they weren't there every show, but they were ingrained into storylines. They were on enough shows where they felt like semi-regulars. So when the pay-per-view came, and at that time, like, Generico, Bucks, and Cabana are also big to non-Chikara fans. So to have Generico versus Jigsaw, Cabana versus Archibald Peck, and then the Bucks versus the Colony was a really great way.
I remember the Archibald Peck gimmick.
So great.
Archibald.
So it was a great way to have these 4 guys who were popular to non-Chikara fans to try to get them to come to the shows, buy the shows, whatever. But they were in the Chikara tapestry enough, or for the Chikara fan, it was still very satisfying to have them on the show. Like, it didn't feel out of place at all.
Right, and like the Young Bucks lost that night, the Colony, and they had Marty Jannetty on at the corner. That's funny.
Yes, you're right. That was that show.
Colt Cabana did beat Archibald Peck. Green Ant, who is, I don't know who was under the Green Ant thing, and I beat Tursus in the ultimate David versus Goliath, because Green Ant was the rookie.
Mm-hmm. Well, that they had done that summer. They did that Lex Express storyline with him too, if you remember.
Oh yeah. The match before that was Sarah Del Rey whipping Jacob Hammermeyer's butt.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Icarus, who I got the chance to interview. It was a strange interview, but nonetheless, I got to interview that man.
Everyone I know who knows Icarus says he's a very weird guy. I've only ever talked to him about Lost, the TV show, so I can't say much with it. I can't confirm or deny that.
Defeated Gregory Iron.
Mm-hmm.
Petro Envoy defeated BDK. This is the show where BDK gets their butts finally whipped because Claudio got signed. And then Eddie Kingston with Tommy Dreamer defeats Mike Quackenbush with and Eddie Kingston cuts great promo. One of the best promos in pro wrestling history.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome, and that was the introduction of the Grand Championship, and he was for sure the guy to win it.
Yeah, it's so funny to see like Eddie Kingston on my television every weekend. I'm like, I saw him in Chicago, man.
That's the beautiful thing about independent wrestling, because I did some commentary for a local wrestling group, Nova Pro, for years while they were around.
Right.
And I would always tell people, like, come to these shows and see these people live, like, and you get to meet them. Like we've had your Jordan Grace, Jonathan Gresham, Wheeler Yuta. We had MJF come in. All of this.
Same thing with Monster Factory.
Yes,
I've done with Monster Factory.
So all this before AEW, and it's like you get people being like, "Oh my gosh, I remember when MJF is in the main event of this pay-per-view. I got to see him in a tag team match down the road and get a picture with him, for $10 or whatever." And it's just this cool connection. You get that kind of sense of pride or whatever.
Underdog Fantasy is the fastest growing fantasy app and easiest place to play fantasy sports. Just jump on UnderdogFantasy.com or download the app, draft your team, and that's it. And if drafts aren't your thing, they also have a pick'em game where you can win 20 times your money in a single night. Use promo code RADIO, and Underdog will double your first deposit when you sign up with up to $100 in bonus cash. Deposit $100, get $100 free. That's promo code RADIO. Terms and conditions apply.
Be like, yeah, I remember. I was there when they were trying to make it, and now they've made it, and I feel that deeper connection to them.
Right, and whether it's WWE or AEW, I've seen people making in both companies, and especially in a juggernaut school like the Monster Factory, it's like and another, as Eddie Kingston would say.
Mm-hmm.
It's so humbling to be a part of that, because it's like obviously Monster Factory's track record is next to none, even before Danny took it over. Man.
Yeah, they've had a reputation forever, and everybody who's been a part of them speaks very highly about them.
Yeah. So I'm glad that I got to be let in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just some schmuck, but like the independent wrestling doesn't leave you. That's the part that I want to say. The independent wrestling does not leave you.
What do you mean by that?
Like going to shows, doing the grind, like that doesn't leave you. Like if you're a wrestler or if you're a fan, like going to those shows, being a part of something that's ultimately greater than yourself.
Yeah, it's like it's almost like the show is this weird. It's almost like the show itself, like, is almost like the least important part.
Yeah.
It's the journey to get there. It's the experience you have. It's the feeling you have, and then everything kind of surrounding it that means the most.
Yeah. Yeah. So how many Chicago shows have you been to?
I want to say, if you're counting King of Trios as each individual night, I want to say I hit about 50 shows in total.
That's impressive.
Because I had kept the list of them for a while. Because I was doing King of Trios every year since like 2009. I missed 2 years. 1 year I was sick, and the other they were in England.
That King of Trios.
But then it was a matter of like, all right, I can pop up to, I'm where I am, the ECW Arena was like a 3-hour drive away. So I was like, all right, maybe I can pop up for like, oh, hey, I really want to see Cibernetico. I'm going to pop up for that.
Right.
Or just like, hey, this happens to be a free weekend. Can I get a couple friends together to go up? Sure. Let's go up for the pay-per-views. Oh, they're running Baltimore. We'll go there. Oh, my buddy in Chicago wants me to come visit for a weekend. Well, how about we make it this weekend? Like I happen to be doing WrestleMania weekend the 2 times they were part of like WrestleCon the 1 year and the Collective the other year. So, and then they did the Richmond area, Virginia a couple times. Actually, I'm sorry, I did 3 like WrestleMania weekends because I forgot they did Orlando that 1 year. And then there's little things like they did Anniversario in 2017 in Hellertown. And that was a building I had seen a million times on DVD. But by the time I was going to shows, they had stopped running there. So I was like, all right, I gotta make that show just so I can say I've been part of history. So looks like 42. I was looking at my list, 42 shows overall. I got a chance to go to, with King of Trios 2019 being the last shows I attended.
Yeah. And some of those shows are the times of your life, you know?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Like some of those weekends are memories I'll have with friends that'll last the rest of my life.
Yeah. So though the company may not be belly up, and it sucks like when it happens.
Mm-hmm.
You know. You still have those memories, man.
Yeah, and that's, there's people out there who I understand, like they don't want to watch Jakar anymore, support it, and like I can understand that, and I don't begrudge anybody who can do that. But my thing is like, whether it's here or not, or whatever those reasons may be, like I'm not going to let that sour the positive memories I have or the good experience I have, and have that taken all away. So the fact that it's all there on IWTV, and I've still got my collection of DVDs just popping and remember those shows at that time. Like Jakar is a huge part of my fandom, and I would say the majority of my wrestling acquaintances I've met online, like that's my identity to them, is like the Jakara guy.
Yeah.
So that's something that I think will always be like associated with myself online, for better or worse, forever and ever.
Right. Right. And for me, and I'm just it doesn't even matter what I am at this point in the wrestling community, because I've made so many good friends. I've talked to so many good people. I've gotten to talk to like your Alan Coonahans, I've gotten to talk to wrestlers. I've gotten to talk to some of the greatest pundits that have ever talked about wrestling, And those are the memories I have, I don't take that lightly.
Right. And you think about, isn't it crazy to think like Alan lives in Ireland? You and him like would have never talked or ever had any reason to talk if it wasn't for pro wrestling.
Right. Right. And Alan's just such the sweetest guy. He was the first guy I thought of because he's such the sweetest guy. And he had me on his Pro Wrest Paradise, and he didn't have to do that. And I was like, I feel like I'm the least named guest ever to be on a Pro Wrest Paradise show, but hey, I got to be on the Pro Wrest Paradise show.
He was somebody who I had talked to him online a handful of times, and then I just so happened to run into him and his partner Sarah when at a couple DGUSA shows in Miami, because they happened to come in for that WrestleMania weekend, and I was there too. And this is like, my Dragon Gate fandom was at a fever pitch, and he's a huge Dragon Gate fan too. So I said hello, and we got to sit with each other and experience that show together. And man, it's hard to believe that was 10 years ago now, but I'll remember that. I'll always remember like that Dragon Gate show, the USA show where El Generico returns as a surprise. That Alan was next to me when that happened, and how such a cool moment that was. Yeah, he's a great dude.
Yeah, it's just, like I've talked to so many good people, and it's the people you meet that is the experience of wrestling all over. Like I've been to like about 50, not 50, but at least 30 Monster Factory shows, and at this point, I feel like they treat me like family, and the guys know me and like treat me with dignity and respect, and that's the thing I look for in a community.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the stuff that matters. That's what matters in just life.
Right. Amen.
Fuck wrestling.
Yeah, not just wrestling, life, Yeah, and like it's hard to believe. It's just hard to believe I've been a fan for coming up on 20 years. 2005, 2022.
Yeah, close to it.
I'm putting in those years, man.
Yeah, we got that. We got that disease, if you want to call it that.
Oh, we do got that disease.
Big
And
time.
you're reviewing a lot of current wrestling.
Yes, some.
Stuff.
Yes,
So,
some. Oh, go ahead.
So it is what it is. I have Dynamite on in the background. I love Dynamite. And like I love like how I don't think it's perfect, of course, but it re-energizes the feelings.
Sure. Yeah, that's, that is something that I find very off-putting about a lot of wrestling with stuff, is like treating it like partisan politics or sports teams or whatever.
Yeah.
And it really to me, it's one of those games where like the only way I can win is just not participate. So that's why a lot of the stuff I've covered is like Ring of Honor. Like during the pandemic when they came back with the Pure tournament, I really dug that, and I hadn't really. When I moved, I didn't have cable television anymore, and when I did, our local channel would show the Ring of Honor television show at like 1 a.m. on Sunday or something. So I DVR'd to catch it in the morning or whatever. But it had been a couple of years since I'd kind of lost touch with Ring of Honor. But now they had it on their website easily available, and I was really interested in the Pure tournament. I rediscovered it that way and really fell back into it. I'm you being a New Japan fan and stuff, like, and an AEW fan, like, you remember that end of 2018 where they had that massive exodus of all the all elite guys.
Yeah.
And it was like, how are they going to do it? But man, they really restocked the shelves with some really excellent people.
Yeah.
And it took some time, but it seems like they really started figuring things out. They finally, after all this time, got a really good women's division together. And then it went on hiatus, and we'll see what the future holds. But that was something that really recaptured my attention. The pandemic was that. And then sort of the same thing happened with New Japan, because they had their US branch at that time. And, they were making great leeway in the US. And then the pandemic happens, and they had to sort of, and out of that birth this TV show Strong, which at first was, close crowds and all that, but that introduced me to a lot of the LA Dojo people. And there was a lot of people that I had become a fan of through the indies that were going through there, like your Brody Kings, your Greshams, your Yutas, those guys. And I really like the format of that too. Part of that, I think, for both of them too, is that like they're 1 hour shows once a week. So It doesn't ask a lot of your time. It doesn't take up a lot of it. So for me to follow that,
it's easier than a 2-hour show plus a 1 hour show and then 2 YouTube shows on the side. I don't even watch YouTube shows with
right.
AEW.
Yeah, right. Well, and it's even if you're a big fan of the company, it's like, you have like, there's other things you're interested in. There's, you got to work, you got to sleep, you got other things in life that are just a priority. So you just have to make those decisions. And so for me, it was pretty easy to keep up with the 2 hours a week, plus a pay-per-view or special here and there. And that for me was like the current stuff I was digging the most. And it was something that was episodic, so reviewing it kind of made sense. And and it keeps kind of my writing skills sharp and things sharp like that. And on occasion, I can pop in a Ring of Honor compilation if I feel nostalgic and take care of that too, and have it housed in one place.
Hey man, that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about, man. Just keep on trucking, man.
Yeah, and that was the other thing too. Is like, I lost Chikara in the summer of 2022, so I was like, all right, well, what now? And after a few months, that's when Ring of Honor came in, so I was able to like give myself a little bit of a respite, get my head cleared, and then. So that kind of came along, and it was like, here's the thing to fill that void that suddenly had come in that I was not expecting.
Yeah, it's just, you can't expect like things happen, and they happen for a reason,
Yeah.
And
like you said, it's rolling with the punches.
Exactly. And I feel like I've been rolling with punch for the past year, I've gone with wavering things in my fandom and stuff like that. I deleted the Twitter app for a month. And that was so refreshing because I felt like I didn't have to be on anyone's opinions or anyone's stuff,
Yes. Yes.
And now I take that with me as I don't get so invested in that.
I think that is there is a good thing of like having this communal thing of like Twitter where, hey, everyone, like, hey, Dynamite's on, let's all watch it and tweet about it. But then there becomes like this, maybe you feel compelled to tweet about it when you don't want to, or maybe you just don't have a take about something, and that's okay. As a video game person, I would go to Giant Bomb for reviews and stuff and follow those people. And there's somebody who ended up leaving the website to have a career change. And a lot of it was just sort of like, he's like, I was kind of tired of just having to have takes on everything. Like, if I was doing it's hard to do if that's your job and you're on a podcast every week talking about stuff. But yeah, like it can get exhausting. So I think it's okay to recognize that and just be like, maybe I will take Twitter off my phone or my iPad or whatever for a while and just enjoy it on your own. I think that's plenty okay too.
That's why I sort of gravitate towards classic wrestling and more like older wrestling when I did, because I was like so sick of the territorial stuff. And the territorial stuff with the WWE versus AEW, even though I enjoy AEW, it's just like that discourse is not for me.
Same. And yeah, I would gravitate to older stuff too. But like, even with Ring of Honor and New Japan USA, like, yes, they have their fans, but like, there's no arguments or like anything coming up with those. Really, it was just sort of like, all right, this can be my own little thing I enjoy, and I don't have to hear 1,000 opinions of it thrown in my face all the time.
Exactly.
And like you said, same with the old stuff. Nobody's tweeting about Royal Rumble 1997 or whatever right now, so you can just watch that and enjoy it on your own time.
Or some random Japanese match or some random French match from 1967 that someone unearthed. Have you ever seen any of those French matches?
You know what? I think I saw someone like a while ago share a clip or like a link of it, and I like watched it for a little bit just out of like curiosity. But like start to finish or a deep dive, no, it was just like, whoa, that's crazy. This footage even exists. It's like a curiosity.
Yeah, those French matches are crazy, like ahead of their time.
In terms of like with the mechanics of the match.
Mechanics, like like mechanics, movements. The guys are light on their feet, getting ready to it's so refreshing to see. And then people were like, oh, this Will Ospreay guy, he flipped around too much. Oh, these French guys flipped around in 1967.
Yeah. It is interesting to me, like something that I think fans go through these phases too, is like either they get, through one way or the other, they get these ideas in their head and that really influences how they watch wrestling. But I think at the end of the day is like wrestling in and of itself, part of the beauty of it is because it's because there's so many different styles and because it is this illusion. I don't think there's as many hard and fast rules about what wrestling is or should be or what you can and can't do as a lot of people think, or that they apply to a situation. I think it's all very situational. And like exactly what that French wrestling thing said, like, oh, old timers didn't do this or do that. And you watch that and you're like, well, here's some video evidence that at least some people did. So yeah, I think there needs to be less of those demands or musts and must nots in wrestling in general.
Yeah, I agree. And like, I think wrestling is an evolutionary thing. It evolved into what it is, and so people work differently now than they did in 1967 and then they do in 1987.
Well, it's also interesting just as time goes on, like stuff that was modern is now stuff you're like nostalgic for. Like who would have thought, like when people are watching John Cena in the late 2000s and it's like FU Cena or whatever else, like there's an entire generation that you as a fan don't think about, like they grew up on that guy and that's who they like long for and miss, as the generation before them misses Steve Austin, and the generation before them misses Hulk Hogan, and the generation before them misses Harley Race and Ric Flair. It just is what it is. And it makes me, it's so interesting out here, like the crop of indie wrestlers who are like, oh, I grew up watching Abyss on TNA and he's my favorite, or just things like that. And you're like, I didn't even know those people could possibly exist, just with your, whatever your age is and how you take in wrestling. So that's a lot of fun for me to watch, is like these younger guys in their 20s or whatever talk about like what their influences were. They're like, my favorite wrestler of all time is Edge, which isn't like this crazy pick, but it's because it's like, that's the first person I saw. Like, the first thing I remember in wrestling is when he cashed in the Money in the Bank, and you're like, holy shit, you are really young. Yeah, so that's very fun to me to hear those influences, and just how, again, like stuff you're watching that's modern, you don't even conceive that it's going to be something that you're going to be nostalgic for at that time. And then years pass, and lo and behold, you become that way.
Yeah, exactly. Like I got some heat on Facebook for saying I wasn't as nostalgic for Stone Cold Steve Austin as everyone else was, because I started watching wrestling in 2005.
Sure.
It wasn't the thing of I don't know who Stone Cold Steve Austin is. I don't know what made him great. It wasn't that aspect. It was more, I'm not nostalgic for it.
Right. Well, it's like I was like Leonard F. Carson. He has his wrestling podcast, At Odds with Wrestling, and he talked about a couple months ago was the 25th anniversary of the Raw in the Manhattan Center, where the ECW guys show up right before Barely Legal. And he's like, it's so interesting to me as a diehard ECW fan who was watching, he was watching in 94, 95, 96, people being like, that's when I had first heard of ECW. And I said, well, hey, that's me. I didn't know what ECW was till that point. So it's so funny. Our perspectives are just so different, because he was a dyed-in-the-wool ECW fan at that time. And for him, it's hard to imagine that's anybody's first time hearing it. And lo and behold, there's a whole class of people who that is absolutely the case.
Exactly. And like, there's some people, even when we were talking about Japanese tapes, who were tape trading when Masao Kawada was the thing. And then I come in and say, I watched Masao when Masao died.
Yeah, totally. But hey, man, I feel like it doesn't, like there's that bad thing about indie wrestling too, with people who are fans of the indies who like, and this is something I really like, my fandom, the reason I would do stuff like PW Pondering's Chikara Special and why I do my thing now is if I'm really enjoying something in wrestling, I want to be that person to share it and get more people on board with it. That's the reason why I do it. That's a big reason with Chikara when I did everything I did, was to help demystify and explain some of the harder aspects of it, to kind of take down that point of entry barrier. But then you have those fans who, like, there's people who are just now seeing Eddie Kingston for the first time in AEW. And they're like, this guy's promos are amazing, or this guy really connects with me, blah, blah. And you can get those people who have been like, well, where have you been for the past 15 years or whatever?
20 years.
Right. Yeah. And I'm that guy, like, look, it doesn't matter if you were an Eddie Kingston fan when he came in 2002, or you're an Eddie Kingston fan in 2022 and you're seeing him for the first time. Everyone's welcome. Everyone's on board. Welcome to the club. That's my perspective on things.
Yep, exactly. And the fact that people argue about it,
and it's like, just why? Like, what does that achieve? I don't understand.
I don't know. It's just a macho contest at that point.
I guess it's this weird thing, and this happens with all sort of nerd cultures, is trying to be the smartest or the coolest or whatever, and it's awful. You'd think by this point we'd be over that shit.
Oh yeah, and we're not, because we're insecure about our own cute coolness.
Yeah, that's unfortunately the case. But
hey,
we found the good people in wrestling, and you want to keep them close, and that's what you got to do. Just ignore the other people.
All right. I think that's a good way to end. Honestly, your plugs.
Not a whole lot. So like we were talking about, I review New Japan's USA branch and Ring of Honor over at KevinNash4.com. But I do have some like plans kind of going in my head for maybe covering some more of that 2000s independent stuff at some point. Like we were talking about, some of modern wrestling irks me in some ways. So there's part of me, it's like I'm going to go back to my 2000s wrestling cocoon, just living there for a while, just in another world. But I also do podcasts about television shows over at entertherealworld.com. That's REEL. Myself and Jerome Cusan, who helped co-found Pro Wrestling Ponderings, we're doing that now. And yeah, we're going to be talking about Better Call Saul when it comes back soon, as well as Barry. So very excited about that. Ooh. And yeah, and so anytime I do new stuff, I always will post about it over on my Twitter at KFord13. So that's really the best place to follow me. When I got a new review, a new podcast, whatever, I'm going to post about it on my Twitter.
KFord13. You can follow me on Twitter at DJDCooks. I was tweeting today about Clayton Kershaw. This is the first time I've been using Twitter since the month hiatus. Clayton Kershaw not getting a perfect game. And that,
well, hey, you at least got baseball back, so could have been.
You got baseball back. Yeah, so. At least that happened. And like follow me for my internet and GM Great Match Pod for my Great Match Generator podcast. We review 4 great matches every week. Me and my friend, not every week. We try to record every week, and we know it's not possible. But every like 2 weeks or so, me and Adam Yuri yak it up and watch some great matches. We're going to be up to episode number 20. We're up to episode number 23 on the Social Suplex Podcast Network, where you can find this one, and you find all the great podcasts over at the Social Suplex Podcast Network, such as Keeping It Strong Style, One Nation Radio, and All Things Elite, as well as so many great podcasts. My God. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for listening to Meet the Press Slam.